and agreed to do the history background of our family, and we've got a couple of hours for that, and questions are welcome, so welcome everybody, and I'll let them get started. Our videographer unfortunately is not here this morning, but Nancy's going to try to videotape it too, so it'll be available afterwards and for people that weren't able to come. Great. So get out of the way, and you guys can begin.
All right. Wow.
Nick, you want to try it, please? It was working.
It was working a few minutes ago. Yeah, I turned it on. Hello.
Turn up.
Ooh.
Okay.
There we go.
Bingo.
Probably too much.
No.
Okay, what am I talking about? Yeah. Okay, the history, pre-migration of the Burns family, the Burns surname, in Sligo, East, of course, lots of Burns in other parts of Ireland are not related to us. But I first became interested in Burns history and genealogy about 37 years ago. When I was making business trips to Ireland and discovered, or remembered that Patrick, my great-grandfather, wrote a memoir tracing himself back 6 generations. So I got hold of that, and I spent those about 20 years trying to verify that or disprove it. I became quite an authority on the Jacobite War, and 1688 to 91, I believe it was. But I was unable to verify Patrick's claim. Anyway, many others were working on the family history in America, based mostly on Patrick's genealogy. And Louis Burns, I call him Star Lake, Benson Mines, wasn't it? Joe Burns of Minneapolis, Richard Burns of California at the time, Phyllis, Nancy, Michael, Leo, and of course Ann. So I concentrated on the pre-history, the pre-migration history of the family. So what I prepared is what I hope is a quick review based on recent evidence, mostly DNA, of where the family originated in Ireland. So with that, let's try, where's the little arrow here? Get used to this one. Okay, first, I skipped the title. There, what we are not. And unfortunately, that's what we are not. So Pat traces the panel burn of the Wicklows, and he traced himself back 6 generations to that plant where Patrick O'Byrne was supposedly bought in Auckland in Galway in 1691. The parish army was defeated, he fled north to Sligo. Unfortunately, we're not related to Ben O'Byrne in any way. So the DNA shows that they have a very definite pattern, which I helped detect through my Byrne DNA surname project. And see where I am here. Patrick, okay, yeah. Next slide, I just wanted to show something. The belief that if one's surname was Byrne or Burns or B-E-I or an or anything similar, that we all came from Wicklow, everyone seemed to do that. And I discovered as my project, my DNA project grew, it's now over 550 people, that it was common to have an origin myth, I call it, myth that tracing them back to Wicklow, because the clan was quite famous and was the last clans in Ireland to be defeated by the English Norman invaders. That big red star, and
I don't know where laser pointing went.
yeah, well, let's skip that. The red star is East Peak, so that's our group.
Yeah. Utility.
Yeah, here, I'll take that going now. And yeah, this is a group in Mayo. This is Donegal group, quite large, B-Y-R-N-E. This is the Sept O'Byrne, which I thought we might belong to, B-E-I-R-N-E. Then there are groups in County Louth and Monaghan. And they're all in my project, and they all are quite separate from what we are. Where's the next one? Okay, and then a lot of Burns think they descend from Robbie Burns, the poet. And I do have Scott Burns in the project, but they're not related to Robbie Burns. First off, his name was not Burns, it was Burness, B-U-R-N-E-S-S. He shortened it to Burns. And the B-U-R-N-E-S-S family has a different genetic haplogroup, as we call it, than we do. And secondly, Robbie never had any descendants. He had a few legitimate children, he had a lot of illegitimate children, but the legitimate children died out. So I don't think there's any living today. Now, get the next one, please, yeah. Okay, this is just to show you the distribution of the name in 1850. This is Burns. Most of these would be Scott Burns, not from Robbie, but from other groups of Scots named Burns. Incidentally, Burn, B-U-R-N, is a name for a creek or a stream in Scotland and in parts of Ireland too. So you can see the concentration there, and you can see a little concentration here, which is us. That's Eastie, and close to Eastie. The name Burn, B-Y-R-N-E, is mostly this is the clan of Burn, of the Wicklow Mountains. All right. Let's see.
You want the next slide?
Yeah. I guess, yeah. Okay, what we are, that's more important. One of the first mutations associated with the, what is it, sorry. I gotta learn the word.
Right.
There we go. Okay. Nope, I wanna go back. I think we had it. Oh, we don't have it.
The Northwest Irish?
There we go, Northwest Irish. Yeah, one of the first mutations associated with the geographical area was called M222. I had myself tested in 2004 when I first heard of DNA, and then because of that I started this DNA project, and I am M222, that is Northwest Irish, not Leinster Irish. I then tested two others from the family. I'm a descendant of Patrick, of course. I tested a descendant of John, which would be Dan, Steve Burns here, and Danny Burns from Michael. And I wanted to verify that we had a pattern, that we the same pattern, that we related, and we definitely are. So I then tested two men in Ireland, and named Burns, and they also are related to us. So we have 5 of us established a genetic family. And the slide, yeah, that's the one. And that's my what's the laser thing? Yeah, where are we here? This is our family here. This group, that's part of my project showing on the screen. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it, but we have a very distinct marker right there, that red. Yeah. Every one of us, 2 in Ireland, and the 3 of us here in America have that, and it's not a mutation. All these other colors are mutations. That one is a null. I mean, we don't have anything that you could say is responsible for some of our family traits, maybe. But I haven't found anyone else. So they have 550 members in the project, mostly about 25% from Ireland, and the rest mostly America, some Australia, and so on. But none of the others have that null as this marker. So if anyone comes along and thinks they're Burns, I can verify it quite easily. Things are Burns Meesky, they call us. So let me put this down on one of the pages here. Yeah, one to the next, which is this is an enlargement that shows the 3, where are we? Oh, yeah, you look at the screen. See what kind of screen goes to. Yeah, that's over 2. Michael Burns. Okay, that's the three of us who are descendants from Thomas Burns, Michael being his grandfather. I figured, though Patrick listed his ancestors back 6 generations, I literally take, have him go back as far as Michael. I thought that he would know his own grandfather, but not necessarily. Some of the others might have been his grandfather, as the earlier ones. Now, these are the two in Ireland. They're not, they're related to us. They have a common ancestor someplace back in the late 1600s, early 1700s. We haven't identified him as yet. So how far back can we trace? Well, M222 is associated with an Irish warlord named Niall of the 9 hostages. I can find a photograph of him, of course. So it's the clearest thing. There it is. So if anyone looks like him, you know darn well he's one of us. Not a horse, a man on a horse. And this is where he lived. Between Donegal and Derry, called the Grianan of Ailey. That's a current picture, really. I've been up there a couple times, and it hasn't changed in, I guess, the 1500 years. Niall lived about in the late 5th century.
Wait, what?
5th century. In the 400s, and he is responsible for bringing St. Patrick over to Ireland as a slave. So we have some responsibilities here ourselves since we descend from him, or his son, actually. Again, that's a closer up of it, and the Vietnam, and what we are. Niall had about 30 sons that we know of, but only the two most important, the ones who rose to prominence, were Kennel and Owen. And we are descended from Kennel Owen. Each of them divided the north into kingdoms. See the Kettle Connell and the Kennel Owen. Spelling's crazy, but it's pronounced O-W-E-N. And the genetic markers that they have now identified as belonging to the Kennel Owen are S588 and was it A2314, I think. They're both from this area up here, which is Inishowen, the Inishowen Peninsula. Innis meaning peninsula or island of Owen. So that's where we came from originally. Now, the two together, the Kettle Owen, the Kettle Connell, form the northern Neil. And they dominated the High Kingdomship, that's a term, of Ireland for, probably 1,000 years. First, northern, well, the Kettle Owen would be divided king, and then when he died, the Kettle Connell would alternate. But eventually, the Kettle Connell pushed the Kettle Owen a little bit south, and here we go. From the Grianan, I call it, down to Tir Owen, which was County Tyrone today. Okay. The name originally was Tir Owen, country of Owen. And that's where our ancestors lived. This is, I think, Tyrone, yeah, there's Tyrone in the center. And the capital was Dungannon, I think that's right? Yeah. Dungannon down here. And just south of Dungannon was a territory called Minterburn, M-U-I-N-T-E-R-B-I-R-N. And that's the clan we come from. There's another picture of it. This goes Tir Owen. Now the question is, how do we get from here, Tyrone, over to Sligo? And I don't have a real good answer for that, but first, here to show you how the line descended in the Kettle Owen. These are clans. formed the Kennel subdivisions. And one of them was called O'Byrne, B-I-R-N. And that came from Clem Byrne, Victor Byrne, is descended from B-E-R-N, Byrne, McRory, McBurchard, so on and so forth, on the back. This Byrne was our ancestor, lived about 800 AD. And again, we are descended from him. But the Winterburn and all that, okay, now Tyrone, how did it do Sligo and why? In the 1600s, late 1500s, 1600s, very troubled times in Ireland, especially in that area. This just shows the scene of a battle. Just passed over that fast. That's the way they dressed in those days. Sunday dress. And I think it's no, it must be that one. Must be, just remember. Okay, the 1600s were very difficult times. There was a plantation of Ulster, as it was called, where the landowners were tired of the troublesome Irish tenants that they had in the north, in Tyrone. So they brought over a lot of Scots and a lot of English, northern England, and turned over the farms to them, pushing the Irish out, Celtic Irish. And many of them had no place to go but further west, and further north, further south, whatever, but they spread out. And that's one possibility for our Burns family reaching Sligo. Another is that we went through Donegal first. But anyway, in about that time, 1659, there was a Penrith survey, and it covered Sligo, but there were no Burns in it. So I assume there were no Burns in 1659. We got our ancestors. The Hart money rolls. There were several Burns in Sligo a few years later, but they're not related to us. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out if they were or not. Then the only verified ancestor we have, the only verified Burns would be our own family, our own ancestor Thomas Burns, who was born in 1754. So between them, there's about a 100-year gap, and I figure that's when the Burns moved from Tyrone or wherever they had been, or possibly Donegal, down into Sligo. And at the time of the migration, there were many, many Burns, not only in Eastby, but as far over as Ballyshannon. You know the names of those parishes, Kilmachelgan and so on. Where they all went, I don't know. But ours went almost surely to Eastby. We're almost definitely, into that, we're almost definitely Kennel Owen and Winterburn. So I just have a few slides here on life in Eastby, just to show you what our ancestors faced, enjoyed, or whatever. That's Eastby today, of course. Very pretty scene. That's probably Market Day. It's not Eastby, but in some town in Sligo. That's a street, Eastby is, yeah. Quite old. No cars on it. Another one. This is one, a cottage. Since the Byrne family was fairly well-to-do farmers, they would have lived in a hut like a house like this, and they had a large family, so I imagine it was at least that size, maybe another room onto it. That was the transportation of the day. Now this is the landlord's house. Eventually, before they migrated, they moved to Cougar. They lived in Cougar for a couple of years, and this is the landlord's house in Cougar. Sabina and Nancy and Hugh. Nancy, you with us? Yeah. And Peter was here too. And so you can see the kind of building they lived in. And this next shot is a kind of, I think we'll get very good shots of the land around where they could have farmed. You just get an idea. It was very flat and very boggy, not the best land. Farmable. That's the church, built in 1838, that they must have gone to, had to go to, it was the only one. And, what is that? Oh, that's the castle, the Rosslyn Castle, and the river in the foreground, where Patrick said he played as a child. That's the bridge, Easter Bridge, that Patrick may have worked on, since it was built before 1847, before he migrated, and he must have obtained his claim to be a mason on some work such as this. That's the Easter River, very pleasant. Split Rock, people will recognize that. Where's Kevin, my grandson? There's a legend that you go through it 3 times. You go through it twice safely. Of course, I can't even get in. But Kevin, as a child, I told him you can't go through it 3 times or snap shut on you. So you have to go through the 3rd time. He's rather slender. So he was a rubber kid before. Okay, am I still in the same lecture? I guess I am. I moved to America. The famine, of course. The famine was the big thing. It lasted 5 years. It wasn't the first famine in Ireland. There were many, many famines. But the duration is what made it so severe. And secondly, Thomas had not a very good farm in Cuba. It was farmable. He made a living. But he had a much better farm in Ballybeg before. Unfortunately, there was an election in 1841, and one of the candidates was a Catholic. So I think probably influenced by the parish priest, Thomas, who had a 10-pound vote. That is, he paid at least 10 pounds rent to the landlord, and therefore was entitled to a vote. He voted for the Catholic. Now, you don't do that. The voting was public, and the landlord usually voted all his 10-pounders in a wagon or so. It took them into Sligo, which was the polling place, and everyone voted in public. I could raise your hand for the candidate or whatever. And since Thomas voted for the candidate not supported by the landlord, a couple of years later, when his lease came due, it was not renewed. And that's why he had to move, the family had to move from Ballybeg to Cuba. And then the third reason why they may have moved to America was the predecessor's reports. I assume people were writing back. We know people left Eastleigh before our family did, and some probably went to Watertown, and undoubtedly they communicated back by letter and encouraged others to come. So that's what they did. That'll be in the next lecture. The actual move. That's I think that's in Dublin. Yeah, Dublin. It shows this is the boglands in Ireland. Where's Eastleigh up in here? I got Eastleigh right? Over there. That's Eastleigh. There's a lot of bogland, a lot of mountains. So the land in general is not the best in Ireland around Eastleigh. And that's just a traveler. Okay, conclusion. We're going to have a conclusion. Yeah, I thought we all may be a little disappointed not to be Clan O'Byrne. We all have shields on the wall, at least I do, or copies of that 3-handed coat of arms, but that's not ours, I'm sorry to say. But we descend from a clan that was just as prominent, probably more important, in earlier days. A clan that provided many high kings of Ireland, which the Clan O'Byrne did not. But its position in Tyrone was much more vulnerable to the Norman and English invaders, so they were suppressed much earlier and dispersed. But dispersal did not change their DNA. We're definitely, very definitely, Neil, U-I-N-E-I-L-L, pronounced E-Neil, and Kennel Egan, and Owen, spelled, I don't know what the small n is, it's just an aspiration, I guess, and probably Ninterburn. Okay, with that, then we're going to pass on to the more interesting one of the Burns family in America.
Bear with us.
Yeah.
So
tell us who you are?
Oh,
Just to- Yeah.
and you know, I hope that no one minds introducing themselves over and over again.
Yeah.
I'm one of John, who's the right-hand man in the raffle. I'm one of John's descendants, and I am John to his son Thomas, to Thomas's daughter Laura Burns, the only girl in that family, from Laura Burns Farley to Paul Farley to myself. So I'm Ann Farley Fillhart. My husband's back there somewhere. Who's not?
Probably saw me at the door.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but I went to school with your father.
Oh, okay.
She went to school with your father.
Well, let's
We
start
went
with
to dancing school
Patrick.
together too. Dancing together.
Patrick is my great grandfather. My grandfather was his oldest son, Thomas James. His son was Justin W. Burns, Justin Warren Burns, and me. And my two kids have moved in.
Thank you.
We're the Farleys from 740 Gotham, which is the brick house with the beautiful turret, right across the street from
749, that's where we grew up.
another brick one.
Yeah, built by 1893, I think it was, by my grandfather.
So what was the address again?
For the,
Both of you, 740 and
740 was the house that
But the
Thomas.
street name.
Oh, Gotham.
Gotham.
They're all, most of them are Gotham or offshoots of Gotham. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that.
All right, let's, why, when, and how did the Burns family leave Ireland? Well, I said before, the principal reason was the extended famine. It was not the first famine in Ireland, but it was the most severe because of its duration, and the potato crop failed completely several years in a row. I'm going to skip some of this because I said it before. The Burns family was not of the landless class called cottiers. They're the ones who started it. The million people in Ireland who started it, that's the people who did not have any land of their own. They didn't have leases on land. They rented land by the year. And it's just small plots of land for the most part, enough to grow potatoes on to feed their family for that 1 year. So when the potato crop failed, they didn't have any money to rent land from that on. Didn't have any money to migrate, so they starved.
Our next slide isn't loading, we're just trying.
Oh.
If anybody's techie, come help, we're fine with that.
You're doing great.
Comments on that earlier, you can just close it out. Want to try that? Yeah, remove.
We can start again.
Yeah, go ahead, close it right out, because, close that one out. Because Paul has this one. We can still talk a little bit while we're waiting. Many of the Irish, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Many of the Irish actually took the cheaper way, which was to go to Scotland or England to work, because it was quite expensive, wasn't it, Paul?
Yeah.
To come to the Americas. £3?
3 pounds to Quebec, 4 pounds to New York. That's why so many came in through Quebec.
And Quebec, of course, was part of Canada, which was part of the British Empire, so there was no real difficulty about emigration because you were coming into another part of the empire.
Yeah.
Can you get it? Ah, yay, thank you. Thank you,
Okay, that's just that's a slide of a traveler leaving, I guess. Well, that's the priest. The priest is blessing the departing migrant going to who knows where. That's similar to the cottage that our family lived in. And those would be the relatives and neighbors. It's kind of a reverse Irish wake. They'd never see him again. They knew that. He knew it. Let's see now if I can get it. Move the slides on.
Just be able to click.
Sligo Harbor. Much later than when our family left, but it's a view of it, the kind of ships, the sailing ships. That is, yeah, there. This is a bark. This is the kind of ship that Patrick and Margaret came over on. The bark was a 3-master, rear mast rigged like that. I don't need that, I guess it wasn't no use to later.
And there was like 200 people on the ship, right?
How many
200
people?
people on the ship.
Well, that varied by the size of the ship. The one Patrick came on carried 248 people. Some ships carried as many as 400 or 500. They would be larger ships that came out of bigger ports. Sligo was not a big port, very active. A lot of Irish went over to Liverpool, for example, sailed from there on the larger ships. And in those days, it was regular passage, shipping between Sligo and Liverpool and Glasgow.
And the Burns family sent 2 advanced scouts, Patrick from Paul's line and Margaret.
Yeah.
Michael was the oldest son, but he was probably needed on the farm, so he stayed. And he came over after, but he wasn't one of the first 2. So the brother and sister, Patrick and Margaret was the oldest girl. Both of them the most likely to find a good place for everyone to settle in the new world.
Yeah, kind of advanced scouts. This photo, this is the way the ships were, they lived in the holds for 7, 8 weeks. Very crowded. Each of these little compartments was a bed for 3 people.
Oh my God.
And no privacy, of course. And if anyone had body lice, as most people did in those days, you shared them. The body lice had a real feast as they crawled from one person to another, spreading what? Typhus.
I see the trunk there, and you still have your great-grandfather's trunk?
Yeah, we do. My son Tom has it. Yeah. So which is another sign that the family was not really poor. They had a good shape, and probably expensive for them, trunk to carry their clothes in. I don't know if Margaret had her own or shared Patrick's perhaps. The other sign that the family was fairly well-to-do is that one of the daughters who stayed behind, Bridget, wrote a letter asking if Margaret was still fat. That was, if you're starving, you're not fat. Just the ship's view, when they could get out, the weather permitted, fresh air, it was like that. Pretty rough. This is the course from Sligo. The line leads, not the mouth, up to, I should need that laser here. Anyway, to Quebec. And it took them, I think it was 48 days, Patrick and Margaret. The ship was fairly fast too. Some took as many as 10 weeks. Some got caught in ice. I'm pleasing my finger on this. Some got caught in ice. In fact, Bridget, when she wrote, so when the family left in 49, Bridget wrote a letter to Bridget's daughter to stay behind in Valley Adair. Yeah, okay. Yeah, some of the ships may wander a little too far north in March, when the family left in March, which is pretty early. And Bridget wrote, the report back in Ireland was that they had been caught in ice. Don't know, maybe they were. But anyway, they sailed up to St. Lawrence and out to St. Lawrence, and then some ships from Sligo were wrecked in here. They made it okay up to Quebec, Grosse Isle, quarantine port. Patrick and Margaret's ship actually didn't go to quarantine, they went straight on to Quebec. Either there was, they got a clean bill of health, or I don't know, or Grosse Isle was too crowded. But what's the next slide here? Yeah, this is a shipping into Quebec in 1847, and down, where's that arrow? Yeah, you got it right there. That's the Ellen. That's just Patrick and Margaret. And carried, I think it's 248 passengers. And about 6 died at sea and 2 in quarantine, so some were sick. Probably after they landed were placed in the hospital. So Patrick, I'm afraid he exaggerated a little bit when he said fully a third of the people on the ship died. And I don't know how he got away with it, because his sister was still alive, so he must have believed it, and she believed it herself, you know, when he wrote this in 1900.
Well, he buried like them, right? He was in the,
Margaret was out with Patrick.
Patrick, he did the,
He wrote the memoir.
Saint Fundus.
The service.
The service for the
burial
dead.
Yeah, he said fully a third of the passengers, he said there were 350 passengers on his ship, and fully a third died, which would have been 117. Actually, 6 died, so, but he's Irish, you know.
But now, Paul, so you believe the British record?
Yeah, they had no reason to lie, they had no reason. I got a list of ships here from Sligo, and some suffered as much as 24% deaths coming over. So I don't see why that shipmaster would lie. Did any of the family remain behind? Yes, 2 sisters. Thomas and Mary's eldest daughters had married and had families of their own. The oldest, Mary, had died herself already. She died in 1845 before the family migrated. Do I need this? Can you hear me all right with it?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. She married someone named John Williams, who may have been a Protestant. I don't know. Never figured that, have to determine that. If so, that may be the reason they had little to say about that family in the memoir. But anyway, Mary died in 1845, and John Williams was still alive when the family left with a little daughter, Mary Ann, living in Sligo town. Later on, we traced Mary Ann to London, where she was working as a domestic, and traced her through a letter she wrote to Michael asking for help getting to America. But nothing's apparently happened. But several decades later, there was a note in Patrick's work diary that he'd given some money to John for Mary Ann's passage. But I don't know if she ever came over or not. Maybe she went elsewhere in the States, or she died in the meantime. People died rapidly back then, as you know. Now the second sister, Bridget, we're going to talk about that?
Sure. The second sister, Bridget, had married a man named George Benson of Farley, and she died in 1855. She left 9 children, and George married again, and after the family sailed in 1849, Bridget, before she died, wrote a pathetic letter, not asking for money, but for locks of hair from the family for her casket. You know, she missed them all so much. 2 of her children died young in Ireland, in Farley, and the other 7 of her children migrated to America as soon as they reached adulthood. All of them came first to Watertown, but only Mary Ann Benson Drury, stayed here. George and Jane also did. Jane married a man named Case from Evans Mills. 3 of them went to California, and we have lots of information on these people for anyone who's interested. One is kind of lost to history, but the other 2, one of the Bensons became an attorney and was out in California, had a very interesting life. George worked for Patrick and had a house on Gotham Street. And Jane, who married the Case and lived in Evans Mills, lived not far from the Kinneys. And of course, Mary Kinney was Patrick Byrne's wife.
I thought Patrick Benson, the lawyer, the one who became a lawyer, somehow he managed to do it between the time he left Watertown and the time he arrived in California. He was a very enterprising man. Got in trouble with the law later on. Now let's see. Why did the family settle in Watertown? That's the next slide. It's not entirely clear why. It could have been because of job opportunities, or it could have been that many others from Eastgate Parish previously had settled in Watertown. Patrick and Margaret arrived in Canada in July 1847, and if their destination was Watertown, they had a very roundabout route, and they figured it out. That's the Lachine Canal where Patrick worked when he first arrived. He only worked 2-3 weeks on it, and they moved on, no reason given, from Montreal, where the Lachine Canal was being built, upriver to Ottawa, and then by water still, all transportation was water in this area, down to Kempstown, and eventually, as you know, across the river here. But they're in Canada about 8 months making that traverse for no stated reason. Well, they get sick. They got sick a couple times. First Margaret with typhus, and then than Patrick, and I think Margaret had a relapse, or Patrick did. I spent the winter in Kempsville, and then in nearby Irishtown until February 1848, when Margaret apparently stayed there, and Patrick then crossed and went down to Prescott. Where's Islandsburg? Yeah, Prescott's right here, across the river. And that famous rowboat with the fat lady in the rear rocking up and down, breaking the ice.
Do you all know the story? It's one of my favorite stories from Patrick's diary. Do you want to tell it, Paul?
Well, you told as much as I know. Go ahead.
Just that Prescott was where there were rapids there beyond. It was a common place to cross, and he was sneaking into the United States, basically, like many of the Irish. And he had passage and just a large, not a regular boat, but like a large skiff or a large rowboat coming across the St. Lawrence River. And if you're familiar with the St. Lawrence River, it's not always easy at any time of year, but this is when there was ice.
Ice is February.
Yeah. And they had a fat woman in the boat, and they had her rocking back and forth to keep breaking the ice as they rode across.
Yeah, they get the bow of the boat up on the ice, and she's rocking it down. I guess that would crush it.
I've been curious many times in reading that, and crossing over in a boat in the river at night. What was the United States position, or New York State's position at that time about Irish immigrants? Was there a legal way, or did they all come?
I had read someplace that there's a lot of concern that the immigrants were bringing typhus, bringing disease with them, so they were discouraging them. If that's the reason they crossed at night, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other reason.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
There was no problem later with their naturalization or the rest. There
Or
was
finding
no
jobs
issue,
once you
right?
got ashore. She started looking for work in Ivansburg and.
As
No,
one who
but-
lives on the St. Lawrence River, I can tell you that was a long journey in a small boat.
On a cold
It must
night.
have taken all night or even longer.
Yeah.
All
So-
you have to do is stand on the shore and look across from Ogdensburg toward Prescott, and it'll say everything. Then do it in the winter. It's cruel.
Sabina, if people have questions, I would be interested if everybody would say who they are and if they know who they descend from.
Very well.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, the part moving to Watertown.
Yeah, do you want me to speak about that?
Yeah, go ahead. please.
Okay. From Paul's notes, it's not clear just when Patrick moved to Watertown, but it was probably because of the fire that swept through Watertown in 1849. That's not, of course, an actual picture of it, but
No.
it wiped out most of Public Square, almost all of the major buildings. And so Watertown was a boom town because of the hydropower, because of the factories. And so they needed trained masons, they needed as many people to work on these buildings as they could. In Patrick's obituary, it said that he was thought to have laid the first stone in the Hotel Woodruff, which was built shortly after this time. So the rest of the family, the fire was in May 1849. The rest of the family arrived that same month of May 1849 and crossed into the USA, entering at Ogdensburg, and they stayed in or near Potsdam until November before going to Watertown. Patrick went up and got them, didn't he?
They say there's a family story that he walked up there because no Irish could afford coaches.
Oh.
But I don't believe that. I think the coachmen were all Irish. We couldn't win. So yeah, so if he was in we don't know that. If he was in Watertown first, he must have gone back to meet the family. In the meantime, Margaret came over from camp. No, by then she was working at Potsdam.
Potsdam.
Yeah. But what the family did in Potsdam in those 6 months, no idea.
So where do they live in Watertown? I'm going to go, this is from a Sanborn map. While you're in Watertown, if you have more time, the Historical Society, of course, is a wonderful resource, but the Flower Library, if you go up to where's Phyllis? Phyllis is a longtime part of the genealogy department at the Flower Library. And Phyllis, they have amazing records, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Sanborn maps, binders on many of our family names and other names in Watertown. So a great resource, a beautiful place to visit. And this is from one of the Sanborn maps and shows Beatty Island, where we think that where we know that they first lived.
Yeah.
Yep, there's
There we go. Yeah, I don't know just what part of the island, I went over there once, it was around the old ruins or whatever.
It's all factories now,
It's
but
all
there were,
factories now,
there were
yeah.
boarding houses and places there.
Yeah, it's possible they moved over here. This is Factory Street?
Mhm.
That's Burns Avenue, it didn't exist, of course, when they first came, we'll get to that in a minute, Burns Avenue. So, what's the next slide?
Well, in October of 1852, Patrick purchased.
Yeah, Patrick purchased 2.5 acres on Gotham Street.
And we can show you other, so that you can study them later if you like. But this is Gotham Street. This is the street where almost all of our relatives, either on the street or on these offshoots, you can see Haley's, Ward's, they were on Brainerd Street, Nellis, all Watertown Irish from Sligo.
Yeah, I can read off some of the names, in fact, that might be of interest. On Patrick's side, it was P. Haley, then P. Burns, Patrick, then McLaughlin, and then it looked like Golding, or something like that at the end.
You said it was
corner-
Golden in Sligo?
In Sligo, it's Golden, for some reason over in America it became Golding. And on the other side, from the corner of what's now Flower Avenue, is T. Nellis.
Timothy?
And I can't read the next one, but then J. Burns. So this map would be after John bought that land. And the Golding family, T. Golding, P. Golding, McManus, two McManuses, Smith,
Sweeney's?
Haley in there, and then two Sweeneys, Owen Sweeney, I know was one. And then around the corner, well, we won't get to the Swamp Angel quite yet.
Okay. John Ward, right here, if anybody's, are any Wards in the audience? Anyone descended from Ann Burns Ward? We have the three brothers in the raffle, but they had two sisters in America also. One, Margaret, married Thomas Haley, so you see all the Haleys on the street. They were related. And John Ward, who was not from County Sligo, he was from Westmeath. One of the interesting things about John Ward, who married Ann Burns, is that he was the longtime gardener for the Paddock estate. And when we're at the gala this afternoon, the garden, that estate in the back, that's where John Ward was a gardener for decades. So again, we haven't stepped very far from our gene pool from our first.
No, and you might point out on that map, the Haley house, Haley is, here.
Right down there.
Right here? Yeah. What was that ring anyway, Ann?
That ring was the Young Men's Driving Park. This was 25 years after they first settled. And you can see it's right in the backyard of many of the Burns, including Hugh Farley's grandfather, and who loved horses, loved harness racing. And that was a driving park for harness racing. They also held baseball games there. It's where Bowers Ave and Park Ave, if you know Watertown, are now. But it was, I'm sure, a wonderful place for kids to go over and wander and watch the races. And, it didn't last very long, but they called it the Young Men's Driving Park.
Yeah. Anyway, John was it? Thomas Ward.
John Ward?
John Ward bought property over here on Washington.
Yeah, we don't think that house is still there, but if anyone learns something, we'd love to be corrected.
And the plot right next door, Tom Haley eventually bought that and built a house. I
Yeah,
guess.
we think that Haley house may still be there. He went out and farmed in Pinckney, which is right next to Montague, the Michael farm. So they were there for a while, but then came back and lived in Watertown for the rest of their
And
lives.
it is still there.
Is it?
I'm Dawn Carlson.
Oh, hi, Dawn.
With you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Senator Margaret, this is my daughter Caitlin, and we thought it was 128 Union Street, it's 130.
Okay, so we'll find a picture of that.
I have one. So
Perfect.
I'll send you some.
If you're looking for pictures of houses too, if you go to the official Watertown City website and do a property search, if you use the address, and Phyllis has, and we have over at the Historical Society, they changed the original numbering system in what year, Phyllis?
1908.
1908. So we have that for everyone, we can make copies. For example, 35 Gotham became, is 35.
41.
Yeah, 741.
741.
So we can look up properties to see if they're still there, and it lists in there the approximate time of, that the house was built. So it can give you an idea, if it was the original one or not.
All right.
Go to the next.
Yeah, let's go on to the next.
Just quickly before we go on, I just want to show you that it says John Burns there, it's a little bit cut off. If you're descended from John Burns, this was the Dunn farm. This was his wife Ellen Dunn's father Edward Burns farm. And you can see Gotham Street. This farm became part of Thompson Park. So when you go to Thompson Park, you can see. We're not sure, but we think this block of property that's not John's may have been owned by the city because there's a gravel quarry there, a stone quarry there. And Edward Dunn and then later some of the others are listed in the newspaper as hauling rocks for the city streets. So I'm thinking that that's why that's out. But you can see also the John Burns farm goes just outside the city limits.
Yeah, you can explain this better than I can, because you came up with it. It's a panorama, what do you call it?
Yeah, it's one of the maps from the Library of Congress, and they had bird's eye view of different cities. Have you seen these before? The amazing thing about them is the artists who did them actually drew the houses. If your house was there, you can see the design of the house, and if you know, and the plants still own the house, it's still in the family.
That slide only shows a little better. This is a much bigger shot of Gotham Street.
And we'll have the computer over at the gala tonight too, so if anyone wants to see any of those, we can blow them up. But this is after Patrick had built and given this house, which was
The Belch House?
the Belch House
Yeah, that
next
was
door.
1890.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
And
And
you
across the street, John's house, does it show? It doesn't really.
732, it shows on the big map.
On the bigger map, yeah.
We have lots of census records. Anyone who would like to be invited to the Ancestry Family Tree too, I brought a notebook. All I need is your email. I'll send you an invitation and you can look through everything we have, correct anything we need to correct, and yeah, add to the family knowledge.
And that, I think, was taken by Justin Jerome Byrne in Christmas 1894. And that's 35 Gotham, 741. That's the original Patrick House. There was some kind of a house on that property when Patrick bought it, but he had to build something larger when the family came. So in 1866, he enlarged the house, and that's this photo taken much later, of course, they said 94.
And still in the family.
Still very much the same. That I thought was John's house, but Ann says
But
it isn't.
we're not sure. Phyllis says this is the one that they said, yes? Yeah?
Well, I thought it was 720, but I don't know.
Yeah, well-
This is a lot of adaptions have been made.
And every other house on Gotham Street had an ancestor in it, so. yeah. This one is where the Michael descendants.
That's Morrison Street.
That's Morrison Street, and that was Michael's house after they came down off the farm in Montague and settled on Morrison Street, just around the corner from the Taggart house, and just down the street from the Taggart Mills.
I think, didn't George Taylor live next door?
Not right next door, he's just
Oh.
around the corner, but very close, and again, the Taggart Mills. And Watertown was still a fairly small community.
Yeah.
What's the number on that one?
Kathy, are you still here?
Yeah, I've got it on my phone, I can't remember.
Yeah, we can get that for you.
I'll tell you later.
We have the census records and everything. And speaking of the census records, they're a wonderful way of discovering just how close and tightly knit the Irish Sligo community was in Watertown. Because almost every census, the homes have people living there.
Yeah.
Cousins, friends of cousins, all different sorts. And I just thought it was such a wonderful thing that they were forever inviting others into their home.
Yeah, John must run a B&B, because all people stayed with him.
And just a minute, I just looked it up, Michael lived at what's now 526 Morrison Street, and Taggart was at 497 Morrison Street.
Everyone hear that?
526.
Yep,
And Taggart was?
497,
That would be the other side of West Main Street.
Yes.
yes.
Still there, so you can.
Yeah. This, what did they do for a living once settled? They don't have any slides for that, it's just, some were masons, I can't read it.
Oh,
yeah, Big Burns.
the
Brothers.
Patrick Burns Brothers, the store.
Yeah, they opened a store about 1860 down on Court Street. And Thomas, the younger brother, we talk about Michael, John, and
Patrick.
Patrick, but there was a fourth brother, Thomas. And he pretty much ran the store, but he died young, so that's why he's not in the painting that the Tiger gave us.
Margaret was listed as a tailorist.
Tailorist, was just, I don't know, just seamstress, I guess. And she worked as a domestic when she was at Potsdam in Canada. And,
Michael farmed full-time.
yeah. What else
John
did I say?
farmed part-time.
Yeah.
He was also, John was also a contractor. He worked for his brother Patrick, then he worked on his own.
Sometimes he got the contract or the job, and then Patrick would work for him, yes. Yeah, they worked for each other. Kept careful records who owed what. Nothing was free in this family. Related. Okay, did I cover that?
Well, and the family business truly did become contracting for many of them, contracting, engineering, masonry, building. And as I said in Patrick's obituary, it said he laid the first stone for the Hotel Woodruff. And it said in John's obituary that he either had the contract for or had some involvement in almost every major building in Watertown. St. Patrick's, the brothers worked on, they didn't have the contract for that. But then a descendant, Thomas Ward, did the renovation about 40 years later. The family had the contract for Holy Family, built that, and the rectory, Sacred Heart, St. Anthony's. They worked on, many of the buildings are no longer here, but just behind here was a major printing company, Hungerford Holbrook. They built that building. They built a 6-story bank building across the street, and that's where their offices were. They built the trunk sewer, which doesn't sound exciting, but it was a very big deal in the Watertown Daily Times. They had the road contracts. They built outer Washington Street, out Route 11, and the first roads going to Henderson. They built schools. Paul and I both attended, and many of you might have Academy Street School for kindergarten, and they built Academy Street.
I think we jumped something here. Look at that.
What did we miss?
Forum. Where do they live?
What did
Oh,
you?
family lore.
Oh, the family lore?
Yeah.
Well, we can just talk about that.
Hey, let's do that.
Why don't you start?
Well, let me see where we are.
Oh, here are some of the, we'll just click through. There's Holy Family, got the newer marble. Thomas Ward, this was when the businesses, they're all family businesses, but they changed names. Started out as P. Burns and Brothers, Burns Brothers.
Yeah.
For the store and then for contracting. Then they had
Oh,
Haley Ward and Burns, Burns Brothers and Haley.
Burns and Haley,
And then Burns Engineering.
Yeah, and whether Patrick had a name for his company, I have no idea. I've never seen anything in writing.
This is Thomas Ward, who was Ann Burns Ward's son, and he had the contract for County Met Castle out in the St. Lawrence. And I love this picture because there are probably family members in it, because, yeah. And that was the finished Calumet Castle, if any of you remember that, right across from Clayton, right across from, is that still in the family?
Going off to break the castle
The family working.
I think.
This is the bank building that they built, and Burns Brothers and Haley had their offices there. And Louis B. Ward, one of our cousins, wrote in his autobiography that his first day out of high school, one of his uncles gave him the job of elevator operator in that building. So he thought it was a
Political appointment.
Yeah. This was the Jefferson County Orphans Home, and if you know where St. Basilio's Church is on Franklin Street in Watertown, it was on that large block right there as Gotham comes out on Franklin. So Thomas Ward and, Ward, Haley, and Burns built this orphanage.
Yeah,
And
there-
now we're on
there
family
we are,
lore.
There we are, yeah. Well, you're gonna talk about John Burns and the
Talk
Finnegan?
about
Go ahead.
yeah. John Burns was the youngest brother, and he came over as a teenager, but he had a lifelong love for the native land, for Ireland. And in 1902, he was very active in all the Irish organizations in Watertown, the Hibernians, the Catholic Mutual Benefit Society. And he was speaking on St. Patrick's Day, and he was just saying in one generation how much it has changed in this area. How so many of them came over as working men, and now they were college educated, they were building beautiful homes, they were, sending their children off to careers that they just dreamed of. But he said, I'd really like to go back to Ireland. And the next year, he sold the farm, the Dunn Burns farm, for the city park, for Thompson Park. And he and his wife Ellen, he was the only brother who went back.
Only one went back.
Went back to Sligo. And at the time, Sligo was, there was much abject poverty. And he was really shocked, they prospered here in Watertown in the New World. He was shocked by how poor the family members were. And the Bensons, it would be his sister Bridget who had died, would have been her stepchildren. It was from the second marriage. He met some of them and ended up bringing some of the, few of the girls, 2 or 3.
Three of the girls.
Three of the girls
Yeah.
to Watertown, 2 of them trained as nurses at what's now Mercy Hospital School of Nursing. One stayed here, May Benson. Uncle Hugh, you knew May, yes? May Benson, and did anyone else know May Benson? Yeah, she died in Madonna Home in the late 60s, but she was a private duty nurse for years to many family members, and she's buried up in Glenwood. It's in I have a cemetery guide for anyone who's interested. And one of the other sisters went back to Valley Cedar,
Yeah.
and then her children, she raised them to be, they were doctors and
They
nurses.
became the Barsabbas, as some of
Yeah.
you have met, Phyllis, Nancy.
And very successful. So John Burns and the Fenians, right after the Civil War, there was a movement in the United States to free Ireland by attacking Canada. They felt that if they attacked and conquered Canada, that would send a message to people in Ireland and the British Empire that Ireland would be free. It did not work, as you know. But he was a very active member, and he was actually the commissary for Northern New York. So he was appointed in Utica for that, which meant that he was responsible for feeding and caring for the tens of thousands of mostly former Civil War soldiers, both Union and Confederate, who were coming through Watertown to fight right around Greenmore, Sabina, right up in Malone and that area. General Joe Hooker, the hero of Lookout Mountain, had family members in Watertown. He gifted the Fenians, it was said, 1 million rounds of ammunition, which the U.S. Marshal quickly took back and stored it in a building that was right across the street, a stone building in the basement. And John Burns and a bunch of his Irish friends just came, walked right through the crowd, took the 1 million rounds of ammunition, no one stopped them, loaded it on flatbed cars, the railroad station was right down the street, had a Fenian engineer, and sent it down to Sackett's Harbor where it was stored. It was never used in the Fenian fight. But yeah, he was quite proud of that. It was said he stored ammunition in his house on Golden Street in the basement.
Okay.
So Justin Jerome.
Justin Jerome, I titled this Justin Jerome Off with Their Heads Burns. He was the first of Patrick's sons to attend university, graduated from Cornell, degree in civil engineering, worked for several years on the then being built New York City subway system, and enlisted in the Army when the Spanish-American War broke out. He quickly rose from private to sergeant major, and finally was promoted from the ranks to second lieutenant. After another stint with the subway construction, he was selected to be one of the engineers to construct a railroad between Canton and Shanghai in China, the first in that country. Much of the Chinese peasantry was unhappy with the Foreign Devil project, and there were several unpleasant incidents. I think an engineer was killed in it. Anyway, Justin's strong recommendation to management back in New York was to, when they captured some of these rebels, chop off their heads. That didn't go too well with the public relations department or whatever they had. So it hurt him a little bit in his career. He wrote an extensive diary, kept good notes for decades, and it's fascinating reading. Richard Burns transcribed it, and I don't know if it's online. You find it online?
It might be in the family Dropbox. We'll keep the Dropbox.
Yeah, that I have, I've considered it anyway. Almost up to the time of his early death in 1990, he came home from China, went to Watertown, rather, and died of typhoid 2 weeks later. We caught it here.
Typhoid and even smallpox were still.
They suspect he was weakened by some other diseases in China when he caught his typhoid. Typhoid was not uncommon in Watertown. My father had it as a child, and Julia, who was Patrick's daughter, died of typhoid on Golden Street. Sabina, I often wonder about that well next to 741.
Do you think that might have been the source?
As kids, we used to drink out of the wells in Golden Street, pump
I
handle.
can remember, it was kind of, covered over by the time
Hopefully.
I came along.
Yeah.
I was too curious, they wanted to make me stay away from things like that.
Okay, what else do we
The
have?
Swamp Angel.
Oh, the Swamp Angel, I love that lady. Find it. Oh, yeah, here it is. We used to wonder, out in Calvary, I'm trying to get it right, there's a tombstone right next to the Burns plot. For a long time, we wondered what it was. Mary Kinney, Eleanor Hanley, and so on, don't seem to be related to us in any way, but turns out they were, to the Kinney line. And in Brainerd Street, there lived a lady named Eleanor Kinney, Eleanor Hanley, who was a daughter of this Mary Kinney, and they're considered quite fabulous, infamous characters back at the time. According to family law, George Burns had paid for this tombstone and turned it over to these ladies, which is another indication they must have been related in some way. One of them was the subject of the family tale. I heard this from Elizabeth, Savannah's mother, that there was a lady on Brainerd Street who used to come over to Golden Street carrying a rocking chair, smoking a corncob pipe, and she'd plop it down in front of the house of her victim of that day and sit there and rock back and forth and smoke and shout and I don't know what.
Shout about all the skeletons in the closet. Very loudly.
Yeah. Well, this, the target of most of it, if not all of it, must have been Mary Kinney, because she was related to Mary Kinney in some way, we don't know quite how. That's Patrick's wife, in 741. This lady, Eleanor Hanley, was well known around Watertown as the Swamp Angel. Brainerd Street was considered a swamp area. When they talk about the Golden Street Swampers and names like that, it pertains to the areas further down both around Brainerd. Eleanor Hanley was the daughter of a Mary Kinney, not Patrick's wife, and both mother and daughter were known to the police. Both had multiple charges of public drunkenness and disorderly conduct. To summarize just one newspaper article, November 1888, quote, Mrs. Eleanor Hanley, better known as the Swamp Angel, resides in a little wood-colored house at number 8 Brainerd Street. Last evening, she visited her sister on Orchard Street, wherever that is, and when her sister refused to talk politics, Eleanor attacked her. And was ejected. She then went to the Opera House where she thought that the minstrel band was playing Wearing of the Green, and she gave an exhibition of the Irish jig in the middle of the street. She then ran through the public square followed by a group of boys, but she ran into the arms of the police, chief of police. It took 3 men to cart her off to jail, 2 holding her down in the cart while another pulled her. Time said it was an amusing sight and the crowd followed it. Next day, the Swamp Angel was sentenced to pay a fine of $25 or 120 days in jail. Well, there are many articles. This is just one that
Paul,
I'm sharing with you.
when they talked about, it took 3 policemen to hold her down, my mother told me that on the street somewhere across from 741, on the other side, lived a fellow named Bob McManus. And for some reason, there was enmity between Bob McManus and Eleanor Hanley.
Oh, boy.
And she said, according to what her father told her, one day they decided, they had an exchange and they decided to slug it out. And my grandfather said they were well matched.
Yeah. Now, the Burns owned property on Brainerd Street too, and there was an article, I think that is Eleanor Hanley, who then sued.
Yeah, we have, again, when you go over to the Historical Society, we have binders full of all these different clippings. And Patrick Burns always got his dime, didn't he? And this is a little article about how the city paid him for an easement on his property for Brainerd Street but it hadn't paid the rest of the people.
And they were disappointed, yeah. Okay, then, Cochine for sale. In 1866, Patrick built a still, location unknown, but I think behind the house on Goshen Street. He sold the product, variously called whiskey or pochine, that's the Irish word for illegal whiskey, at $1.50 a quart or $2 a gallon. It must have been potent stuff because in a January '69 entry in his diary said he sold Edward Dunn a half gallon for $2. And in the same entry, he noted that Edward Dunn's horse fell in Hanley's well.
Those of us who are descended from John
They must have
Sisson.
He sometimes paid his workers with booze. A man named O'Connor was paid with 2 gallons on January 8, 9, 11, 14, 17, and 20. On January 22, his thirst apparently slaked. O'Connor only received 1 gallon. This is all from Patrick's work diaries that I transcribed.
Paul, I have a question, Paul.
Martha Peterson.
Oh, you want me to go back?
No, wasn't there a story, am I wrong, about a Burns owning land in Washington DC? Yeah.
In Washington DC?
And they, were not related?
It was the David Burns, I believe, that.
Oh, that's Davy Burns. He's in my DNA project, some of his descendants, yeah.
Okay, he would sell.
He owned all the land where the White House is.
And that's not our
George
thing.
Washington wanted to buy it, and he wouldn't sell it. So he called it an obstinate Scot, yeah.
So
But
that's
as
not
far as
our-
we know, that's the Scottish Burns family, yeah.
Thank you.
He didn't receive payment. He finally gave in. He received land grants in Washington, which were much more valuable at the time. His daughter became known as the Queen of Washington because of the wealth that she had. Okay.
When did other relatives come to Watertown? Again, one of the biggest surprises to me when I started researching family history is how many of the Watertown Irish came from not just the same county of Sligo, but just about the same neighborhood, and how many were related. Thomas Haley's sister, Miss Dawn, Thomas Haley's sister married Bartley Gilligan on Washington Street, and their descendants ended up living at 740 Gotham after Thomas Burns and family left. They were all cousins and related, or related to cousins of, yeah. So we had Benson's, we've already talked about. Thomas Hawks was on the Kitty side, or the Flynn side. His mother was Catherine Kitty Rua Flynn. Are there any Graham descendants there? No, that was Patrick Graham.
Yeah.
No.
His mother was Nancy Flynn.
Nancy Flynn.
Who was a sister of Mary Flynn, who married Thomas.
Thomas Burns.
Our ancestor
Alright.
Thomas.
Yep.
And we didn't know that, because Patrick always referred to Hawks in his diary as my apprentice. He never said he was a cousin. We always wondered why he's buried in the Burns plot. But a few years ago, we decided, Phyllis and I, and I thought my sister Pat was along, but she says no. Visited John David Burns and in Black River, and we were saying we're sorry we never found the Bible that these men had, Patrick, John, and Michael. And John David said, "Oh, I got John's Bible." He went in the next room, brought it out, and there along one page was listed a lot of deaths, including the death of Nancy Flynn. And I think he said Mother of Hawks. So that's how we made the connection with it.
And there are copies of those Bible pages over at the Historical Society, one of the binders.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So the cemetery probably is a community cemetery, but families have individual family plots? Is that how it worked?
In both Glenwood and they would buy, some of them large family plots, and they would have extra spaces, and yeah. For example, May Benson, who had no family, real family in Watertown, is buried in another family's plot.
I think the breweries in Glenwood, aren't they, Judy?
They're buried,
They don't have-
well, they're next to the Whalens, I mean, it's still probably not.
Yeah, that's what the Waylands. And Haley, did you?
Just that we have on the ancestry site, which anybody who would like an invitation to, I'll send. Again, the Peter Haley who lived on the same side of Gotham as Patrick.
Yeah,
And Thomas Haley who married Margaret, and,
they were the sons of Dominic, weren't they?
yeah, and Margaret Haley who married the Gilligan, were all brothers and sisters, all related. The Grahams, sorry that I got that mixed up, were Kitty Rua. Kitty Rua married, Rua means red haired, so it was Catherine.
Yeah,
Flynn?
one of the Flynns married a Graham, Kitty Rua, well, that was, she
Yeah.
was a Flynn, she married, yeah.
And a couple of her sons came. Patrick Graham was one of them. He was in Watertown for a short time, worked for a while with Patrick, he was a teamster, and went to California. Became quite successful there.
That's James Benson, I'll pass through these. That's the Haleys, Tom and Margaret, that's a marriage picture. That's the family later on,
There's the whole extended Haley family.
and this is.
There's Patrick
Now
Graham
we get to the Grahams.
and his sons,
Out
California.
in California.
Santa Clara.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to, what do we know about Burns Avenue, Haley Street, Ward Street? Burns Avenue is off Factory Street, or is it on here?
Right here.
Right here, yeah, good view. And this is the old St. Mary's Church. It was sold off, and Patrick bought the property, Burns Avenue, for $1,000. There was no avenue there, he built that, he built 9, maybe 11 houses along it. Say houses, I have no idea what kind of shape they were in, shacks or what, but he was a slum landlord, the way he divided them into rooms, and people rented rooms, or 2-3 rooms at a time, sometimes a basement, sometimes the whole house. But, he had, 10 or 20, 20, 30 tenants at any one time. And both Patrick and Mary, his wife, were kept very busy collecting rents in court a lot, suing for tenants who skipped out, I guess. They may be being sued, I don't know.
This Hitchcock Lamp Factory, that's just a corner that shows there, that was another building that was built by Ward, Haley and Burns. Oh, that's a little bit of a close-up of Gotham Street, you can see it a little bit better.
So where the Haley Street is? Yeah.
Haley, this was all McGowan's, there's John Ward's. William Brett and the Brett family still in Watertown. Brainerd Street, all settled by the Irish.
Okay, let's go on to Michael. Well, Michael bought a farm up shortly after they arrived, I think in 1852. They moved to Watertown in 1849, wasn't it? Patrick bought his land on Gotham Street in 1852, and about the same time Michael moved up to Tug Hill, bought 100 acres, $211 and some odd cents. Puzzling where he got $211, and so soon after arrival, maybe they borrowed it somehow. But that's, we think, the original house. This is a picture taken in the 1820s, but took it very well because he sold it to his cousin Graham Thomas, was it, or John?
I think it was John.
Yeah.
We could check, we have all those records.
Yeah.
It's not all cleared anymore.
No, I went back to nature, taken over by the bears. That's the street it was on, the road it was on, and that's the property itself. We finally found the property. It's now a hunting lodge.
Many Irish settled up there on the top of Tug Hill, and it gets more snow than almost any area in the eastern United States, so I think it was probably a shock to their Sligo system.
Okay, that's Grange, no, the next one. Grangemore Cemetery in near Sligo, where the Flynns are buried. They're back in here somewhere. And some other relatives can be identified in the tombstone. Most Irish didn't have tombstones, of course. They used the same grave over and over and over. And that's the cemetery on Easkie Abbey on the main street of Easkie. And that's where our ancestors had to be buried for decades, for generations, because there wasn't any other cemetery at the time. So where in here, I don't know. But if you stand out in the street and look at the cemetery level, the level of the ground there, it's a couple feet higher than the street is. It's well filled. That's the, Calvary, that's the Burns Monument, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, right,
Black River's right across the street.
yeah, I just been flashed through these, that people are gonna go there.
That's a question? Oh, do you have a question?
I'm sorry?
Yes, you had said that they had used the same,
The same grade.
Same grade.
Back home. What do you mean?
It had kind of family graves. I asked the priest, Tom Sweeney, who was showing me around once, why there are so few graveyards in Ireland and yet so many people have died over the years. And he said, because they use the same grave over and over and over. And he said his own mother was engraved with 900 people that he knows of.
Were they just on top of each other and they keep on
Yeah.
over?
Yeah.
Inside each coffin,
No.
or?
They
No.
just, no, they didn't use coffins, they just wrapped them in sheets.
Also,
They
they
do
got
use coffins.
whole
No,
one
they didn't
house.
use coffins.
No.
And that's why there's so few tombstones too, because when you got 9 people, who do you honor? There's a tombstone on top. And besides, you're gonna have to move the tombstone to the next person.
So that other cemetery, who's buried there? Like Michael and Patrick and John are all buried at the one that we're here?
Their ancestors would be buried.
But they were
The one in,
No, they're talking.
That's in Ireland, I'm sure. Yeah.
this was the original one in Watertown, in Calvary, and
The
that's
one
where.
before that is ours. I'm sorry.
But this was carved by, Patrick and John.
Anthony John, as far as I know.
And this is Michael's.
That's Michael's.
Mhm. And we sprayed it, Nancy and I are working on all that moss and the rest, but it's a really interesting stone, because, Michael's wife, is it Catherine Burke?
Yeah.
Her father lived to be, what, 100 years old? So he's on that stone. It's as you first come in, if you're not familiar with it, as you come into the first entrance of the cemetery, Michael and his related family are there on the left, and just a little ways farther, you'll see on the left, the tall Burns Monument. Which cemetery? That's Calvary, that's the older one. And then they had a fight in Watertown between the churches and decided that stayed with Sacred Heart and the French Cemetery, and then they opened up Glenwood, which was named after the priest at St. Patrick's Church. So that's on the other side of town. So Calvary is over on the Black River, and as I said, we have directions written right on here too for Glenwood. That's on the other
Is
side.
Calvary still in use?
Calvary is still in use, yeah.
Yeah, I was after the history.
Yeah.
Well, I don't mean gun ram,
Wasn't the city owned,
Glenwood.
and it was
Still.
Glenwood.
Oh, no, they were church.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
clear. No, I was
No.
clear, but that was what I was clear.
Because the very first cemetery where John Ward was buried, he was here, I don't know how many years before.
He came in 1840, I did find his entry.
So did the church, so like they would pay rent for their pew, but how would they buy the family plots? If they would actually purchase that from the church? Yeah.
And it could be large, C.C. Burns plot at Glenwood is very large.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Captain Edward Burns, many,
Yeah.
family members
Right
are
behind.
buried in his.
That's, okay. I'm glad to know that. And, that's the
This is
Haley,
John
well,
Ward's
that's,
and
that's
Ann
the
Burns.
Ward.
I don't know if his body was moved or not, do you know? John
No.
Ward's from the old Arsenal Street Cemetery. Do you know Phyllis or Nancy?
I don't know.
No? Thomas Haley's, and this is also at Calvary.
Right next to it, there's a tombstone about the same size right next to it, is his brother, with Healy, this one is Haley, isn't it? The two brothers spell the name differently.
There's an ad in one of the Watertown directories where the name is spelled differently, I think 3 times in the same ad. So, I don't think they care too much. We're
Yeah.
now on, how did they meet George Tiger? And why so many paintings of Michael?
Well, I thought they lived next door to each other, how they met. And they,
They're
but
very close.
they also, Taggart shared a studio with John Thomas Burns, who was a portrait painter. And maybe that way,
And that was,
John Thomas being, of course, the son of Michael.
and that was right next door, it was in the old Washington Hall, which was before the Y building was there.
The other reason may be that Michael didn't charge for sittings, Patrick charged 75 cents a sitting. No free lunch.
Something I've wanted to know the answer to all my life and never got it. Was George Taggart related at all to B.B. Taggart?
I don't know. Who's B.B. Taggart?
B.B. Taggart would be Josephine Taggart, Rice, Hudson.
Oh, yes, I
Yeah,
definitely.
Kathy knows.
Yes.
Yeah, they were not brother, like Josephine's ancestor Taggart was like a cousin, I think, of George Taggart. They weren't, or they may be brothers, but they were not direct descendants.
Okay.
But that's how we got the raffle, was through Josephine.
But the Taggart, paper mill Taggarts, he wasn't a direct line.
They're related to them, but actually, he may have been, I think, yeah, his father, I
Where
think,
one
was,
came from.
yeah.
Yeah, he was descended from that.
He
We
lived
have
right there
his
where-
family tree too, if you're
Where the
interested.
mill was.
Wealthy Watertown.
If he was a
industrialist.
400 block on Morrison Street, that's right next to the mill.
Right, to the
Yeah,
Tiger
it's
Mill.
main auto now.
Does anyone know who that elderly man is on the right?
No. Right now, Ellen, our cousin Ellen,
Yeah,
had a lot of glass plate negatives.
that's, Ellen gave me this picture,
Yeah.
you know.
That John T. took, most of them, and then he's in a few of them, and this is one of them in the glass plate, but what I have discovered is, I think in 1901 or 1900, they went on some of the Burnses went on a vacation in the Adirondacks. Celestine Burns, my grandfather, and I've just discovered this recently, and there's a bunch of photos in the Adirondacks, and I'm wondering if this, because they were, I can't tell if that's the Adirondacks, but it could be that it was part of that family party that went on a vacation to the Adirondacks.
Yeah, I thought for a while it was John, might be John Thomas, but it's not, wasn't it?
No, it is definitely not
Okay.
John Thomas. But whether it's one of the Celestines, I'll try and, I can find the entry and say who was in the party.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
because there's other, I have other what I'm doing to everybody who's interested is, I don't own these negatives, they're going back to Ellen's family and her brother's, sister's children, all of them. But what I'm doing with them is I'm finally taking them and having them all digitized. They will be on a flash drive. And anybody who knows anybody who wants them will then have access to the whole collection.
Yeah, I just did.
Kathy
digitize
Burns
a bunch of
Hendricks.
them that I had, that were part of that collection, put in orphan box that were
Yeah.
stuff that I had, and I sent it to Kathy Quinzer. And so, yeah, I just found a photograph, I could do all that area for it, yeah, so I was very excited, yeah.
There are also family pictures in the Houston collection of glass plate negatives over at the Historical Society. And Mary Ann Kelly Smith was able to process many of those, and we have those available too. We're hoping this whole weekend we can all share, or at least share our emails and the rest, get that Dropbox working, and share as much family information as we can. But they turned out beautifully. Thank you, Mary Ann, for that. I'll just show those later. How did we find the raffle?
Well, we never found it. There were two paintings. Taggart painted the three brothers, and first version he apparently sold to a calendar company, the Osborne Company, which used it extensively. It became very popular, of course, and it was reprinted many, many times. Joe Burns of Minneapolis, and Richard, myself, others, we tried to contact the Osborne Company, but no longer exists. We tried to find its files, they couldn't do that. We heard it was in the Brooklyn Museum at one time, but the Brooklyn Museum didn't know anything about it. We checked the Smithsonian, it turned out we have a relative named Brame, Branson Brame, and she helped a lot in the research. But we never could locate that copy, but we had heard roundabout from someone that Celestine, Michael's grandfather, had Taggart paint the same scene, so to speak. It was not a copy, it's just the same scene. And, but that copy had been lost in a fire. Your father, was it, Michael? Did his house burn down or something?
No.
Oh, well, anyway, that was the rumor, that it had been lost in the fire. So Much to our surprise, one day we got a call, Joe first in Minneapolis and then me from Michael's brother in Dallas, who said he had it. And he offered it for sale to us, but the asking price was a little beyond our interests and reach. And so we turned it down, and then later we heard that a nephew, was it, of Taggart had purchased the painting for Josephine Robinson, her name was,
Roberts.
And that's the raffle we have now.
Do you want to add anything to that, Kat?
Well, Tag Edwards was Josephine Hudson's son, so he bought it in Texas from the Celestine's descendant, and then gave it to his mother after he had it refurbished, and then she had it in her house for many years. And when she was doing her estate plan, I talked her into leaving it to the Jefferson County Historical Society, but she first wanted her son to have it. So Tag Edwards had it for life, and then when he died, which was last year, his widow brought it back up here, so now it's here. And of course, the Historical Society didn't really understand the significance of it, but I think they do now.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much.
Do we have any relatives left in Eastgate? Well, the two I tested are Burnses. That's James Kilcullen, wasn't that the name?
Yeah.
We found him on a trip with Phyllis and Nancy, and Ellen was on that trip. And we visited James and his wife Margaret. And they had a copy actually of part of Patrick's memoir, so they were quite interested in genealogy. Great visit. I went back to see them many times later. James died, I forget how many years ago, up in his 90s. He was a Flynn. He was related to us through the Flynns. And the next picture, and that.
Paul, was there a Henry Kilcullen? Does that name mean anything to you?
Henry?
Henry.
Henry Kilcullen.
Oh, that was the brother.
That was the brother.
The postman, the brother of James, yeah.
Sorry.
So you knew him?
Yeah, we met him.
Ah, okay.
He had us for Sunday dinner. It really wasn't.
Try a new day. The back's there. Oh, there's the horse. That's black.
There are two Kilcullen sons in Boston. I guess they changed up the money. They're back in Sligo in Eastgate now, two houses. And the wife, Margaret, I think is still alive. Margaret Knox, her name was. I asked Margaret, I said, how do you like it around here, Margaret? Just to make the conversation. She said, I don't like it at all. So the people here are very, very unpleasant. And in further conversation, turns out she had been born 5 miles down the road.
Yeah, people were much more friendly.
Much more friendly down there.
I will say about that dinner is that it was up relatively early in the afternoon, and we did start out with a big glass of whiskey.
Ah, that's the Irish way.
Who is she? Paul, who's this? Is that her?
That's Lily O'Donnell. She, again, she's the granddaughter of Kitty Rua. And she's the one who told me where Kitty Rua lived, where the ruins of her house were, but when I couldn't find anything there because someone else nearby carted off all the rocks to build a barn or a pig pen or a wall or something. But I visited Lily many times, and last I saw her, she was in a retirement home in Tubber Curry. She lived up near Loch Easty, right up on top of the Ox Mountains, with her son Sean, who ran a big herd of sheep. Very charming lady, who mostly folklore, you know, how to cure things. That's it. I think Lily must be dead by now. And there are Flynns. There's other relatives around, but I have not been in contact with many of them, or never more than most of them, never more than once. So that's all I can say. Very few Burns left. Burns all came to America or Australia.
When you go over to the Historical Society, we're hoping that the pictures, the binders, the memorabilia, that it will spark a lot of conversations, maybe spark some memories, or even just bring up questions that all of us can work together to answer. This is just a bare overview, but Watertown is full of resources. This room is full of resources. Sabina has more stories that I would love to hear. And
Every one of them made up.
That's all I got for you.
story about Patrick, how he died on his deathbed. He always had a glass of whiskey with every meal. And when he was on his deathbed, his daughter Helen brought in his last little glass of whiskey, but she watered it, thinking he was too weak for straight whiskey. He took one taste, threw her up in bed, said, "Daughter, never put water in it," and fell back dead. Water kills.
The binders that you're talking about, I saw them briefly yesterday afternoon. For those of us who are hoarders about stuff like this, are some of those able to be copied and we can get copies?
I think that wouldn't be a problem at all. Plus, many
They
of us
have
have our
copy
little
facilities
cameras and
over
our,
here?
they
Oh.
do, and we can talk to Jordan about running them through. Maybe we'll get a notebook with, I want most of these. Many of them are clippings that are also on the Ancestry site too, so we're just trying to get them as organized and as easily accessible as we can for everyone.
For those of you who are not already on the Facebook page, the Bringing the Brothers Home, we encourage you to join that, because I think we're gonna keep that going and keep adding more things to it and make links to the Dropbox and keep adding stuff. I'm hoping there'll be more pictures that will appear, including more of Michael. We think there's more Michael paintings out there, we just haven't found them all.
Did you have something about tours?
Well, I Nancy yesterday put up a marker at Calvary, so, but again, it's very easy to find. If you go to Calvary looking for Burns graves, just come in the first one, and they all are just in a line. Burns, Haley, Ward's on the left. For Glenwood, which is a much larger cemetery, we have guides for anyone who's interested. It's not an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea. We put markers around to some of the sections where there are many relatives buried, and there's a short list of people in here. Anyone who would like one, just come up and help yourself. If you want more guidance, I know some, Phyllis knows many, Nancy knows. How many other people know where many of the bodies are buried? Michael, all right, talk to Michael, especially for Calvary, yes?
I've been to both of them, Glenwood, yeah.
Yes?
Just one question, do you have the address for the Montague Farm?
I brought a map, because I was asked yesterday, I brought a map and I'm marking on it where the house, where we were told the house was, the farm.
I also want to remind everybody too, if you haven't bought tickets yet, you can get them at the door, but you also can go over to the Historical Society today and also explore some of the binders that are there. I also want to make sure people know about the endowment that we've established. The Community Foundation in this building is going to hold the endowment for the benefit of the Historical Society. And this was a way to make sure that they knew that the raffle was valuable, that they didn't sell it, that it didn't walk away. So the condition of the endowment is that painting must stay on public display in Jefferson County. For as long as the Historical Society owns it, they will get the earnings from the endowment, and we're trying to raise $100,000. So that would give about $5,000 a year to operating, and it will grow over time. I figured that was enough money to take their notice that they would actually preserve the painting. If they want to rotate it out of exhibit, it will go to the Flower Library, or it will come over here to the Philanthropy Center. And if for some reason the Historical Society goes out of business, the library gets it. If the library goes out of business, unlikely, then it would come here. And if they're all out of business, some nonprofit in Jefferson County would have to agree to take the painting, and then they will get the earnings from the endowment. So there are pledge forms all over the place over there. We're encouraging everybody to join us. Any amount would be appreciated. It's going to take us a while. Over 5 years, I'm looking at to try to raise $100,000. So people can do pledges over 5 years or do it all at once. But we hope you'll all join us for whatever amount.
We're 1/10 of the way, yes? A little more?
Yeah, we're a little over 10,000 in pledges and gifts come in so far. Great, thank you guys all for coming, and I hope you'll be coming tonight too.
Where is it now?
Over at the Historical Society of Boston. Hors d'oeuvres and snack foods, and there's a cash bar, and there's just tables, chairs.
I just want to get a photo of everybody on the way out. In my video. Sure. It's a video, so you can just scroll. I'll do a screen capture. That's great.
You get it?
Yep.
private too.
Genevieve. Does she have a nickname? Genevieve. Genevieve works for me. I just want to capture all the birds' faces.